All right. Thanks for joining us. We are Epic Small Business Development Center. We're a program out of UC Riverside, and we work with startups and entrepreneurs in the Riverside Inland Empire region, as well as all of Southern California. We have a program of 15 mentors that help startups at all different of shapes and sizes, from people with ideas all the way up to people who are looking to raise venture capital. So today we are very happy to have Kevin join us. He's a startup attorney as well as an IP attorney, and he's going to be covering five basically things that you need to know to be able to have a successful startup. So we're excited to have him. We're going to take questions as we roll through this. So what you do if you're new to Zoom, there's a Q&A button down there. You'll just click that, type your question, I'll see it, and then as Kevin's going, I'll interrupt him with questions, and then we'll also have some time at the end for Q&A as well. So I will now turn it over to our friend Kevin, and if you want to just share your screen, Kevin, and start your presentation, we'll get rolling.
Great, will do. Thank you, Scott. So here is my screen.
Great.
Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right, terrific. So I'm glad to be here. And I'm going to give a presentation on what I call 5 secrets to startup success. They may not be secrets, they may be things that you already know, but these are things that I have found that clients have learned, often the hard way through making mistakes in the course of starting up a company, and I would like to share those with you. So now I'm trying to advance my screen. Why isn't this working? Give me one sec. I think I'm gonna have to. So I tried to advance it and it didn't work. So let's try that again. There we go. Okay.
All right.
So this is my shameless self-promotion slide, but also want to give you just a sense of, who I am and the perspective that I am providing. So I'm a partner with Stubbs Alderton and Markiles. We're I guess you call us sort of a smallish law firm, but I like to say that we have big firm capabilities in that we have a broad array of legal services that are relevant to emerging growth technology companies and also non-technology companies. So everything from corporate law, securities, which includes financings, intellectual property and technology transactions, mergers and acquisitions, which is important because that's sort of the exit scenario for a lot of early stage companies. And then sometimes, many times, startup companies are successful and they go public. And so we have a public securities practice. And then in the event that things go sideways with business partners, we have a business litigation group. But so it's really what we like to think of as a full service business law firm, but we're not a mega firm. We have one office in Sherman Oaks. It's in the area of Los Angeles. And our clients really are from Santa Barbara to San Diego, from Santa Monica to and through and beyond the Inland Empire. And that's really our focus, is Southern California companies. This is a little bit about me, and I have this here because, as Scott mentioned, I am an intellectual property lawyer, but I'm a little bit different, and I'll explain that in a minute. So I lead the intellectual property practice at Stubbs Alderton and Markiles, and I was in the Silicon Valley. I worked for a major Silicon Valley law firm in the mid-90s, the go-go 90s, and I often am a mentor and advisor to early stage companies. And my background is that before going to law school, I was an engineer, a mechanical engineer. I worked for the local electric company in the Bay Area, Pacific Gas and Electric, as a in energy management, sort of what we would call green tech today, or clean tech. And after law school, I became a registered patent lawyer, which allows me to file and prosecute patent applications with the US Patent and Trademark Office. So I like to think of myself as sort of a combination, a hybrid of a corporate lawyer, a business lawyer on the one side, and an intellectual property lawyer on the other side. And if you think about intellectual property as having three components, one side being protection, the other side being enforcement, and kind of in the middle, commercialization. Protection being filing like patent applications, enforcement meaning going to court and enforcing or defending intellectual property rights. Commercialization is essentially doing business deals for intellectual property developers, owners, to leverage the value of their assets to grow their companies. And that's the world that I live in, the commercialization world, doing technology commercialization, intellectual property related deals. So with that, that gives you a little perspective on where I'm coming from. So when a startup entrepreneur has an idea, looking to form a business, there's a gazillion things to consider as to what they should be doing. And oftentimes there isn't a clear roadmap of what to do first. A lot of times I'll find that entrepreneurs will read blogs or books, search the internet, get a lot of advice from other sources, and then still be bewildered or confused as to what they need to do. I put this slide in as a little bit of a joke in that there really isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of approach to building a business. Every business is a little bit different. Every venture is going to have its own unique attributes and challenges. And so there isn't a necessary, formula, let's say, or pattern for what an entrepreneur needs to do from start to finish. However, there are a few things on this slide that are worth pointing out. So when you form your founding team, you start developing your business concept. Right up front, I have, selecting a business attorney, and I suppose, that's not it's not just self-promotion. It's about building out a team, and that team often will include an attorney. Oftentimes will include somebody with accounting or financial skills that if the founding team doesn't have them, somebody with marketing skills that understands not just how to market a product, but also understands how to identify market opportunities. So what you're doing sort of in the early stages is taking on an approach of how can I leverage information or experience that others have and apply that to the venture that I'm building. And so from the early on, founders, should be looking to people within their network who they can bring on and who might be compatible with them to bring on as part of their advisory team, let's say, to help them move forward in their venture. And so as you move forward on the page on this flow chart, it's talking about selecting, structuring the entity. Is it going to be a corporation or an LLC? Oftentimes people will say, oh, you have to form a Delaware C Corp, and you have to allocate X number of shares, and you have to have an option pool of X percent. And like I said, that may be the norm, and they may be telling you from their experience of what they think the standard is, but it's not always going to be true. It really does depend on your particular set of circumstances. And so at this early stage, it really does warrant taking a look at what your options are. Maybe an LLC does make sense in the short term. I will tell you perhaps a little bit later in the presentation that investors hate LLCs. They don't want to invest in LLCs, but they do have tax advantages under certain circumstances for the owners. And so again, when you go down this path, it's important to go into and look at these points, these issues, these action items that you're going to take with an open mind and evaluate the pros and cons so you can make an informed decision. And so
I just wanted to, yeah, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to, we had quite a few people join late. So I just wanted to tell the audience, you can, in the Q&A button, you can type in your questions. We're going to answer in real time. So don't save your questions for the end. We're going to ask and answer questions as we go through the presentation. I'll see them, and we will then, I'll interrupt Kevin again as he's going through this with questions. So let's make this as interactive as we can. So sorry, Kevin, just go ahead. I wanted to make sure that the new people who just joined knew that they could ask questions during your presentation.
Sure, absolutely. So we're on slide 1, and I'm going to highlight this box here very early on as you develop your business model and your go-to-market strategy. It also says identify your capital needs, because generally most early stage companies, startup companies, are looking to raise capital to fund development of their products and services and to grow the company. But you'd be surprised how many times I'll ask a company, well, how much money are you going to raise? And they just take a number out of the air. Oh, we're going to raise $2 million. Well, how did you come up with that number? Well, I think that's, based on valuation. Or no, identify your capital needs based on what it's going to take you to get to a milestone that puts you in a position to raise more money. And so you want to make sure that, number one, you don't run out of gas before you get to that point, because raising money before you've hit that milestone that puts you in a position to raise money is really a bad place to be. At the same time, raising too much money at a very low valuation could be detrimental to your future prospects and the incentives that are important to keep the founders interested and to keep going to build the company. So, and then one more thing I just want to point out in this flowchart diagram is you'll see that down here, even pretty far into the process, is patent and trademark applications. Now, for those of you who joined late, I gave a little blurb on my background, and I'm a former engineer before law school, and a patent lawyer. But I'm going to tell you, as a startup lawyer, that many times filing a patent application for your technology is not the first or one of the first things you should do. They're expensive, and you're often in a place where, in the early days, you're testing your business hypothesis. You don't know if you have a viable business or if there's a market out there that is willing to pay for the product that you're going to develop. So why invest? And the patent lawyers who would see this presentation are going to shudder when I say this, but why invest $15,000 plus in a patent application when in something that you aren't even sure you're going to commercialize until you do a little bit more development, testing, and market research? So that's why I kind of put this patent and trademark applications pretty far down the path in the steps that one takes in establishing a startup venture.
Yeah, one thing I'll mention just for the community that doesn't maybe not know this is that we do have a series. We're an iCourse site at UCR, and we have a great series of basically classes that we do that help the founders first of all, work on customer discovery, and then also start to get to early product market fit. And so I would recommend doing an iCore-like, or it's also Lean Launchpad. It's another term that people use. I would recommend trying to do some type of program like that, whether it's on your own or with a group like ours, because like Kevin said, you definitely don't want to, we've actually mentored some startups have come to us having spent sometimes actually, I think the record I've talked to is a startup who had spent $1 million on global patent protection and had not actually left any money aside to create the product, and then assumed that with all the patent protection, he was going to be able to raise capital from angels and VCs. And of course, that wasn't the case. So I agree with Kevin, like definitely, always look at the IP protection with a I would cautiously look at that before you spend a bunch of money on that. And Kevin, we have one question that I think you said you were going to answer later, but since Apple's asked it now, I think there are probably quite a few people on this webinar who do have LLCs. And so her question is basically, why would an investor not invest in an LLC?
Okay, so that's a question that often comes up. So an LLC is disregarded for tax purposes. If income comes into the LLC, it's not taxed at the LLC level. That income is attributed, not necessarily distributed, but attributed to the owners. So if you're a 50-50 owner in an LLC and there's $1 million, let's say hypothetically, of income, $500,000 of that income is going to be attributed to you. Whether or not you actually receive that cash. A startup in a growth mode, as it is generating revenue, so this isn't, for a startup in development phase. This is for a startup that is actually has product and is starting to generate revenue. Startup that's generating revenue typically is going to want to reinvest the income that it generates from sales and distributions of its product into the company to grow the company. And so if you do that and you're not distributing the income to the LLC owners, then those LLC owners are what? They're going to have a tax liability for the income that's attributed to them, even though they didn't get the cash from the LLC as a distribution. That's called phantom income. And so, people don't like paying taxes in the first place, but people really hate paying taxes for income that they don't receive the cash for. That's really bad. So number one is this phantom income issue that LLCs would have. So typically you're going to have to siphon off some of the income that you would devote to growing the company to give to the members of the LLC in order to pay their tax liability. That's kind of like the equivalent of a dividend. If you're familiar with corporations, especially in the startup phase, startup companies don't pay dividends. They don't have the money, or they can't afford to pay their shareholders anything out of the money that comes into the company. But here as an LLC, you're kind of forced to do that in order to avoid your members having a tax liability without the cash to pay it. Second issue is that LLCs provide their members, their equity owners, with a K-1. That's the equivalent of a W-2 or other tax form that gets reported to the IRS. That K-1 is sort of the signal to the member that they have to include that income in their tax return that they file, their personal tax return that they file with the IRS. And if you can imagine an institutional investor that has, umpteen number of portfolio companies, the last thing they want to do is file tax returns for all the K-1s that they receive from LLCs that they've invested in. They don't want that headache. And they don't want the potential tax liability that the LLCs may generate for them. They're looking to get their income, their distribution, when there's a liquidity event. At that point, they'll take their money off the table, they'll pay their taxes and move on. So that's generally my experience is why institutional investors don't like LLCs. Then the third reason, which is a terrible reason, but I'll give it anyway, is just, investors like to do what's customary and familiar, and and what's customary and familiar is working with corporations. They have a structure, stockholders, board of directors, bylaws. It's a very sort of formulaic process for governance. An LLC is governed by an operating agreement. That operating agreement is a contract. It can be as bespoke and highly customized as the imagination of the people who are the members of that LLC. And so investors oftentimes don't want to go through, I guess, the brain damage of having to figure out how a LLC with a unique kind of LLC agreement is governed.
Yeah, I think, and that's a great answer. I think just to sum it up, if you're a startup that you think you're going to raise professional money, so this is not friends and family. If you're going to raise either angel money or venture capital money, which would be considered institutional money, then I would 100% either have a Delaware C Corp or convert before you start raising money. Because one thing you don't want, we work with investors every week, and you just don't want any easy way for them to not want to do a deal with you because of any kind of headaches. So you don't want to create any red flags for yourself, because they're looking at hundreds, if not thousands of the bigger ones, are looking at thousands of startups every year. So, and a couple just quickly, I think we kind of already answered these, but related questions. Someone asks, how about single member LLC? And that's the same thing, basically. That is not something that you would want to have if you are going to try to raise outside capital. Now, a single member LLC might be great for you, for your company, for tax reasons or whatever, but not if you're going to build a startup. And then Marcus asks, LLC versus S Corp. And I'll let you answer that since you're the expert, but that's another quick answer, I think, as well. But go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, they have essentially the same tax treatment.
Right.
And an S Corp is going to be fine for a non-institutional investor, like a friends and family investor. But that, S Corps are generally used for small businesses, family-owned businesses, where you just have one class of stock, common stock. When you raise institutional money, you're going to offer preferred stock, a different class of stock. You're going to blow your S qualification just by virtue of doing that. No big deal. You become a C by default and you move forward. So, to Scott's point, an S Corp may be fine for now, but just be prepared that when you raise real money, you're going to convert one way or the other to a C Corp.
All right, great.
Yeah. Any more? We good?
No, we're good for now.
Okay. So this presentation is 5 secrets for startup success. And secret number 1 is there is no formula for success. And, in J. Paul Getty's word, you work hard, you rise early, you work hard and strike oil and you'll be successful. And however, with that in mind, that there is no secret for success, timing is super important. And let me just, maybe at risk of dating myself, tell you about a client that I used to work with back in, I think it was 1999. It was called XDrive. XDrive was an internet-based company that provided a service for storing documents online. It was like an online hard drive, okay? What does that sound like to you?
Dropbox.
Dropbox? Exactly. And Dropbox came along, 10, 12 years later. XDrive did okay, but not as well as Dropbox. And so the point there is oftentimes you'll come up with, or an entrepreneur will come up with a solution or a technology that the market isn't yet ready for, that maybe requires infrastructure that isn't yet available. So, what made, let's say, take Uber. What made Uber successful? Mobile phones, right? Yeah. Mobile technology. Without mobile, Uber wouldn't have been Uber, wouldn't have been successful. So I think it's really important to take into consideration, if you've got something that is really deep tech, as it's called, really sort of ahead of the market, maybe, keep in mind that timing is super important, and maybe there's a way to incrementally build toward that solution that corresponds to where the market is at each point in time. Because frankly, you might have great whiz-bang technology, but if it can't be used, if it's not going to scale up, because the infrastructure isn't in place, investors aren't going to be that interested in it. So with that, I'll move on to secret number 2. Get along with your co-founders. I find that one of the main reasons startups fail is due to founder disputes. And these disputes can be about a lot of things. Oftentimes, it's about equity. And so it's really important to make sure that when you're working with a team or a co-founder, to make sure that you have alignment with each other and that and that alignment is sustainable. I represented a company years ago called We4. We4 was named that because there were 4 founders, and they all got along until we started talking about equity distribution, and We4 soon was no more. So what's the solution to that? Have the talk. What's the talk? The talk is, and you'd be surprised how often this doesn't happen or happens too late. The talk is a frank and honest discussion with your co-founders about 4 things: roles, responsibilities, commitments, and expectations. You know, what role are each of you going to have? And what are the responsibilities associated with that role? And if you can, put some milestones or deliverables, attach some deliverables to those responsibilities. You're going to be responsible for, marketing. Okay, what does that involve? Well, you're going to do some market research on what potential market applications there are for our product, and you're going to incorporate that into the deck that we're preparing, our pitch deck. And you're going to do this by September 1st. It sounds a little bit hardcore, but really you need to make sure that everyone is aligned, that there isn't overlap, that you all understand what each other is doing, and that there's coordination. And as simple as that sounds, it happens very rarely in the early days because everyone has their nose down, working, and they all, are kind of doing what they think everyone else, what they should be doing, but they don't stop and talk about these things and assume that they all understand where everyone sits with respect to these 4 things: roles, responsibilities, commitments, and expectations. The expectations part goes to the equity distribution, but it also goes to, or I guess the commitment, it also goes to the commitment aspect of, is this a full-time gig or is it a part-time gig? I've had startups fall apart when one of the founders realized that he couldn't go without a salary for an indefinite period of time, and he was getting pressure at home to go out and get a job. So it's really important to understand the limitations that your co-founders have and to see what you can do to adapt or adjust your relationship in order to accommodate those limitations. One more thing I'll say about this: a lot of people place a lot of emphasis on equity allocation. What's the right equity split? Well, I'll tell you that many times, in fact, more often than not, the right equity split is not an even distribution among the co-founders. And the reason is because not everybody brings the same amount of value to the startup. And so it's really important to have a clear-eyed view on what each person is doing and start attaching some numbers to that and to have people get comfortable about it. It is not about, it shouldn't be taken personally, because I'll tell you something. If you have, let's say there are 4 founders, 25% each, and one person or 2 is not providing as much value because of their skill set, because of their background, because of their experience as the others, if that issue isn't raised by the talk or in the talk, investors are going to raise it. And then it's going to be really awkward. Investors are going to see through that. And then it's going to be really awkward because, you know why? Because you won't have a good answer to those investors. So you really need to preempt that conversation, those hard discussions with investors, by having those hard discussions among yourselves.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many startups. We have a lot of first-time founders in our region, and I can't tell you how many startups have come to our program and have not had the talk. And it is really because, you know, you assume you're all friends or whatever. And when it comes to equity and various things that start happening when you start raising capital, you need to have this talk. The other thing I would just say is we've also a lot of startups that come to us that have not put the founders on a stock option, basically on a plan. And so what will often happen is that, you know, say there's 4 founders, to use Kevin's example. What if one founder just decides that they've already gotten their 25% of the company? So what if they just decide to stop showing up for work, or they just phone it in? So you got to like think about all this stuff, because you never know what's going to happen, especially as you start to scale and as more money gets involved. And so yeah, just make sure you protect the company and yourselves as founders by having the talk.
Exactly. Secret number 3, founders' myopia can be fatal. Well, what does that mean? Well, many times founders go about solving a problem that they have personal experience with. And that solution has an application in their field of experience. And without realizing, and they may be going after a market that is teeny tiny, but that's the market, that's the solution that they're familiar with. And I'll give you an example. I've got a number of examples, but one is a company I represented a number of years ago that had an algorithm. Actually, it was a DSP technology, digital signal processing technology algorithm, for processing recorded audio in a way that really enhanced the quality of the recording. And they came from the music industry. And so their solution was to build an app that can be downloaded from the App Store, and that a user would use to, I guess, integrate with, you know, in those days it was iTunes. And so they'd have a better quality copy of songs that were in MP3 or iTunes. And makes sense, you know, that's something that, you know, was a reasonable approach. However, when we started looking at, and I actually got a marketing consultant, somebody who understands and can do market research and look at the size of markets, what we determined was it might be very difficult to get users to pay for that app because people are used to getting things for free. So how are we going to monetize that technology? And so what we did is we sort of looked at different areas of different market applications, and then tried to identify the market application that was the lowest hanging fruit, had the greatest opportunity, but the lowest level of resistance to entry. And one of the areas that we identified was the, I guess for lack of a better term, sort of the office, you know, telephone conferencing technology. So the, you know, sort of the speaker phones, I'm blanking on the name. It's the tripod speaker phone that is in offices typically. Starts with a P.
Polycom.
Polycom, thank you. Yeah, so integrating into a Polycom to enhance the quality of conference calls in an enterprise setting, you know, our market consultant identified this was an area where the technology could be monetized, the market was big enough, and the integration would be fairly easy to do, and the barriers to entry were pretty low. And so that's an example of, you know, breaking outside of the founder's myopia to look at applications for a solution that go beyond the founder's own personal experience.
So we have a question that goes back to your previous startup secret from Manny. If a startup was founded with only one founder who is also bootstrapping the company, should he bring in more co-founders or bring more core members of the team with equity? So I guess he's asking about what to do to build out the team. I mean, I think that's just a case-by-case basis. I mean, like Kevin already said, you've got to have, if the person's bringing value, if he or she is bringing value, then, you're going to have to negotiate with that person. So we have a lot of founders who, especially in our region, who may need a CTO, for example. Well, if the CTO is the difference between you actually being able to do something with your company and not being able to do anything, then that CTO is going to need to have a substantial equity package to find a good, talented person to join you. So, I mean, if Kevin, you may have a different answer. I think it's case by case in terms of how many co-founders you would bring on and then how you would talk about equity if you're a solo founder. The other thing I will say, working with dozens of VCs, is that the chances of and I know that not everyone on the call is looking for VC funding. Some people are going to bootstrap, hopefully, and build successful businesses without external capital. But for those of you who are raising capital, it is virtually unheard of for a solo founder to raise venture capital. Now, it has happened, it does happen, but it almost never happens. So I would, the team is one of the most important things that a professional investor, a VC, or an angel investor will look at. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Kevin.
No, that's exactly right. I don't know if there's much to add to that, Scott. Those are excellent points. I'll raise a related point, and that is something that I've found with my clients is if you go out looking for a co-founder, especially a technical co-founder, it's pretty hard,
Yep.
especially somebody who's really good. And the reason is, I think, is the people who are really, really good, particularly those who have done it before, had a successful exit, those people are often working on their own projects. And so it's really tough to sort of get them to pull away from their own thing that they're working on to join yours. So I would say, to Scott's point, the team is critical, especially if you're raising VC money, but maybe not if you have trouble finding a co-founder, don't be so hung up on whether it's a co-founder or whether it's somebody who can just fill a need. If you could demonstrate to a VC or an investor that you have a team in place that, however it's composed, that handles what you need to do in order to get you to the next step, typically that's enough. And maybe that technical co-founder who doesn't want to pull away from his or her own project might be willing to devote some time as a consultant or advisor that could fill a need in some respect, or maybe knows people who could help you fill a role in your team. But also look to, and we do this with our clients, look to folks in your network who can help you fill out the team that you wouldn't ordinarily think about. So lawyers, for example, or CPAs, or other professional service providers who operate in the space, in the ecosystem, oftentimes know people who are in between gigs who might be interested in joining your company. So don't hesitate to tap those people to see if they know of anybody that would be a good fit with what you're doing.
All right.
Okay.
Number 4.
So this is goes along with what I was saying before about founders' myopia. And so if you, it's important you only know what you know. So it's important to really expand your horizons and investigate and learn what you don't know. Because chances are your experience is not everything. And I say that because you're going to be expected from the investors to be the expert in your particular area with respect to not just your product or service that you're developing, but the market space, the competitive environment, where the industry is going, who the incumbents are. So you really need to do your homework and understand everything around what you're working on, not just what you're working on. Number 4, raising capital is both a blessing and a burden. And so I've had a client or clients who've said, this is what we're working on, and all we need to do is raise $2 million, and then we'll be on our way. Then our problems are solved. Well, actually, that's when it's game on. You're just sort of getting ready. As soon as you raise that first round of money, no matter who it's from, then you really are going to be called to task. So let's look at some of the typical investors in startups. There's friends and family and fools. And, they can be great supporters of a company. And oftentimes, they're not going to do a lot of due diligence. They're oftentimes investing in you, the entrepreneur, their nephew, for example, because they want to help out. But just keep in mind, the burden is you're going to have to, in pre-pandemic times, let's say, you're going to sit across the table from them at Thanksgiving. And they're going to ask you how the company's going. And you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. And so just be prepared for what it's going to be like to tell, Uncle Jim that his, $50,000 investment you've burned through that months ago, and, the company's not doing so well. Hopefully that's not going to be the case, but you have to understand the consequences of taking other people's money. Crowdfunding, it's got its pros and cons. There's a place for it. I think the only thing I'll say is think about the implications, or I guess the perceptions of taking money through crowdfunding that other investors down the road will have. So in other words, and I'm not saying this is the case, but if you raise money through crowdfunding, and then after that you go to raise money from institutional investors, are they going to think that you were unable to raise money from other traditional sources, and that's why you did crowdfunding? Is that going to be a turnoff to them? Maybe, maybe not. But you should be prepared for that question. Another thing to think. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say one other thing. We've had a few of our startups go through not so much, I think not really, this isn't really about Kickstarter, Indiegogo, which is the original crowdfunding, but
Right.
we're equity crowdfunding. So we've been working with some great platforms like Republic and Seed Invest and others. There's also WeFunder, which I haven't personally worked with yet, but some of the startups in the region are in Southern California have used that platform. But one thing I will say is that it's public. So basically, and those platforms, while they can be great, we just had a startup in Riverside named called Blue. They actually maxed out you can raise a maximum of with the crowd note of 1,070,000. They actually maxed it out, which was great. But if you're a startup that doesn't max it out, that information is out there. So to Kevin's point, if your goal, even if you put, what a lot of startups will do is put a BS goal of like, oh, our goal is 50,000. And then they can say, oh, we tripled our goal. But I mean, any investor knows that if your startup was only able to raise $50,000 on an equity crowdfunding thing, you are probably not a venture investable startup. So just be careful of that. It's the same trap that people who go on Kickstarter, Indiegogo fall in, where if you don't completely destroy your goal, if you have a $100,000 goal on Kickstarter, for example, a lot of times for a consumer facing company, you'd have to do like $2 or $3 million in order to get investor interest. And investors do track those platforms. So you probably will get calls if you completely crush your goal, but most startups don't. And so just be aware that that's out there on the internet, on those sites for probably as long as those platforms are around. So keep that in mind. Can be a big gotcha for startups.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Strategic investors. So these are companies like Intel Capital that invest in startup companies, not just for financial reasons, but because there is some sort of compatibility with their product or technology or market objectives. And so that could be a great source of investment capital for startup companies. Thing to keep in mind there is is taking money from a strategic investor going to be a turnoff to potential customers who might be competitors of that company? So you want to make sure that that isn't going to inhibit your market potential for your products or technology. And then I have seen where strategic investors, oftentimes it's a kind of a dipping a toe in the water before potentially acquiring the company that they invest in. They're getting an early preview into the startup and how it does, and if it does well, they may acquire it. Well, and that's great. The flip side of that is many times they want control over what other investors come into the company. So you need to be very careful about the terms and conditions of that investment, because they may want a veto right on every other investment that comes into the company. And you may get, let's say, the next round with a 3 or 4x multiple on valuation, and say, hey, and you need their consent. You say, hey, I got this great opportunity to have this VC invest in us. And the strategic may say, we don't want another investor. We want to be the only investor. I'm dealing with that right now with a company. And it's good to surface those issues early on. Angel investors, these typically, there are several kinds, but generally there are angel groups. Like there's Pasadena Angels and Tech Coast Angels. And then there are individual angels and then super angels. These are individuals who have done well either in their careers or businesses or through investments and like to invest early on in startup companies. And the thing there is that to think about is this is where you want smart money, so to speak. So these are folks who, people who can add value through as a result of their experience or the contacts or network that they have. And so something to keep a lookout for is what can they bring to the table besides writing a check? And how easy are they going to be to deal with when you are, because when you're going forward with the company? Because investors, like I said, the burden is they're with you essentially forever. And you're going to need to go back to them periodically for approvals or consents. And I had a client, for example, that, a lot of the angel investors were high net worth individuals in Europe. And when we needed their consent, they were off on their yachts on the Mediterranean, impossible to get a hold of. And it held the deal up that we were trying to do for weeks. So you want to think about, who is this person? Are they going to be cooperative? Are they going to be accessible to me? What additional value do they bring to the table? And then last, venture capital. One of the things to think about there is, there are lots of things to think about, but something that often isn't highlighted is you should be doing due diligence on, and this applies to all the investors, you should be doing due diligence on the investors, just like they're doing due diligence on you. And when it comes to venture capital, find out kind of where they are in their fund. Venture capital funds often have a term of 10 years. And at the end of that term, they need to close the fund. And so it's really important to find out if the VC that's investing in your company is, let's say, if they're in year 5 or year 6 of their fund, they don't have much runway before they're going to need to get a liquidity event on the investment they're making so they can close out the fund. So you should ask the question where they are in their fund, what happens when, at year 9 or 10, how much of a runway are they going to give you? Because look, if you're looking to build a company and let's say it has the potential to be worth $1 billion, but it's going to take a while, and they're not looking for a home run. They're just looking for a solid single, and they would be happy with a $50 million exit. Your interests are not aligned. And so you need to figure that out early on because it's really painful to learn it too late.
So one thing, and also I'm shocked that we've done a lot of webinars on raising capital, and we don't have any questions on this slide, which is surprising to me from the audience. But anyway, I wanted to also mention we did a couple weeks ago. We did a deep dive into fundraising with a group out of the Bay Area called Early Growth Financial, and their founder and CEO. Yeah, you know David, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So David Ehrenberg did a deep dive. So I'm gonna throw that here in the chat with the YouTube link in case anyone wants to go, because we had more time than we do now because we're getting through a bunch of stuff here on this webinar. But I'll throw it here in the chat in case anyone wants to go check it out. But so if there are no questions on, we are running low on time here. So if there are no questions, we better move on to number 5 here.
Okay. So you've raised capital, and so you need to be prepared to grow up before you raise that institutional round. It was easy to, it was a fun startup environment, very creative, free flowing, not very formal. But once you raise that round, things are going to change very quickly. There's going to be more structure. You're going to have, there are going to be expectations that your investors who are sitting on the board are going to have, and they're going to hold you accountable. And you're going to need to run board meetings and provide materials to the board members in advance and run the business very in a sophisticated manner. And I say this because a lot of first-time entrepreneurs don't know how to do this. They don't know how to make the jump from startup founder to VC-backed company. And if you don't have that skill set or background or experience, it's pretty tough to learn it on the job very quickly. So you might as well get prepared early on for it, because things change like in a heartbeat. And I'm not saying that to scare you. I'm just saying this is the reality, and this is the way it should be. And this is what you want. You want people who are highly focused on the success of your company, and they're going to have high expectations. So this is not a secret, but sooner or later, you will need a lawyer. And it doesn't have to be me, but I just suggest that you talk to a lawyer who has experience in working with startups. And the reason is because a lot of times startup entrepreneurs will try to do all this themselves. And this is not something that you should do at home or try on your own. This is something that was on Shark Week, where this is a guy racing a shark, a great white shark. Not something that I would recommend that you do. But the point is this: you've got a ton of things to do as a startup entrepreneur. And looking on the internet for form agreements and documents and trying to figure out how to do legal work is not a real good use of your time. Hire a professional, bite the bullet. And same thing goes with accounting and bookkeeping. Get professionals on your team. Work with people who will work with you in terms of fees, because we all know that startup founders are strapped for cash. But, run this like a real business, because otherwise you're going to slow yourself down and you're not going to maximize the value of the potential that you have. So with that, I'll end. And if there are any final questions, I'll be glad to take those.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks, Kevin, for going through that. And are there any questions from anybody while we have Kevin here? I know a lot of you have been asking me for free attorney advice, and now everyone's gone completely silent. So I think we should, if there are any questions, put them in the Q&A button there, hit the Q&A button, throw in a question. And while we're waiting for a couple of questions here, while we wrap up, Kevin, you want to talk just for a couple of minutes about your pre-accelerator, your accelerator that you run in LA, your firm runs? Do you want to mention that quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have what's called our pre-accelerator program. In pre-pandemic days, it was a co-working space. Now we've gone virtual for the time being, but it's a little unusual for a law firm, where we are creating a community of startup founders who can benefit from having access to mentors, just like the EPIC program at UCR, and also participation in events. We have monthly meetings with a VC that talk about what they look for in companies that they invest in. And it's, our firm has a program with the pre-accelerator companies where we will invest $25,000 in startup capital and provide $25,000 in free or in legal services in exchange for founders equity. I think we're asking for 5% founders equity at the very outset. That's immediately dilutable. And that is designed to get an early stage company up and running to the point where they're ready to, when the time comes, raise that first round of outside capital.
All right, cool. Well, we had Apple comment saying thanks for the advice and the info, and I'll just throw up for any of those of you who are on the webinar here who don't know about our program, I'll throw our contact info up, because we also mentor quite a few, about a little over 200 startups here in the region. So I'll just throw this up here so you have it. And so this is how to get in touch with this is how to get in touch with our program at UCR. It's called EPIC, Small Business Development Center. And one other thing I didn't mention is that we also, for those of you who are in the Inland Empire region or affiliated with UCR or in the area, we do have we started and run the only venture capital fund in our Inland Empire region, which is called Highlander Venture Fund. So that's another thing that, we will share deals with them that we think are ready to raise. We also have a number of other programs that you can get access to. We run an incubator in partnership with the city of Riverside and the county of Riverside, which is called Excite, which is in downtown Riverside. So if you're interested in any of these things, all of the mentoring that we provide through our EPIC program is free. And so let us know if you have any questions or need any help. Let me just see. We've got a bunch of, let's see.
Can I answer a couple of these?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and Justin C has one. Yeah. And then also I'll answer the one from Apple. Kevin is in LA. Yes. Although, are you physically in LA right now? You said you were also in the mountains for a while, but normally you're based in LA. So we can answer that one quickly. Okay, right. Cool.
But okay, I can be anywhere these days.
Okay, cool. All right, cool.
So the question about the NDA, is it necessary when pitching to potential co-founders? Yes and no. It is if you're going to be disclosing confidential information or something that's proprietary. But an NDA can be a turnoff to people. It's like you're getting legal on them. So I would encourage you, number one, only talk to people who, and this sounds obvious, but who you trust, who come trusted, maybe through somebody you know. And number two, don't disclose everything about what you're doing, especially this top secret stuff, just enough to sort of get to the next conversation. Cultivate a relationship. Once you've gotten to a point where now you need to get, into the details, and when I say that, I mean, talk about what you want to achieve, not how you go about doing it. The how is really the proprietary, stuff that should be covered under an NDA. But once you get into that level, there's a synergy between you. There's a great sort of, you've cultivated the start of a relationship. You can get to an NDA and say, look, to go deeper, let's put in place an NDA that could protect both of us. But something to remember about NDAs is an NDA is a contract, and a contract is just a set of promises that can be broken. And when those promises are broken, what do you have? A lawsuit. And do you really want to spend time, going to getting involved in a lawsuit? So you just want to minimize the risk of that claim, so limit what you say and only disclose to people you trust.
All right, cool. Well, now the questions are coming. We're supposed to be wrapping up, but let's just do I can answer this one from Randy. Your company is in Long Beach. Yes, both our program, EPIC, we help founders actually now all over the country. And then I certainly know that Kevin could help someone in Long Beach. So we'll consider that one answers. Let's do last one from Manny if you're offering sizable equity to someone based on the role, then is that called a co-founder?
You know, co-founder isn't really a term of art. It's not really legal. It's you know, I consider it's kind of more of a like credit that somebody would get for you know, in the movie industry or entertainment business. So you know, it's more, I think, it has to do with ego than anything else. But look, people like to be, you know, titles are important. People like to be thought of in ways that correspond to their contributions. So regardless of the size of equity that they're getting, I would say a co-founder is somebody who shares and contributes to in a meaningful way the vision that you have for the company that you're, or the product that you're bringing to market.
All right, that's great. And then Lynn wants to know, is it worthwhile to speak with Kevin or another lawyer to discuss an idea? A lot of us are afraid to speak to anyone about our plans for fear they'll be stolen before we get started. Are there protections to get along the way?
Let me
You answer that, then I'll answer it for our program. So go ahead, Kevin.
Okay. So Lynn, whether you talk to me or any other attorney, they have an obligation, a duty of confidentiality to you with respect to the information that you provide them. They can't disclose that to anybody without your permission, even if you don't hire them. Otherwise, they could be called up on disciplinary proceedings with the State Bar of California. And for me, I make my living through practicing law, not stealing other people's ideas. So, you know, it's a pretty big disincentive for lawyers. But you have to remember that's not applicable to non-lawyers. I'm not sure about accountants. So you might want to check with accountants to see if they have a professional duty of confidentiality, but certainly it doesn't apply to non-professionals. So you have to be careful.
And for us, for our program, Epic at UCR, we are all basically, when you become a client of ours, a mentoring client of ours, we sign a mutual NDA where everybody's protected. What I will say though, which is an amateur mistake, which a lot of first-time founders do, is please do not ask any angels or VCs to sign an NDA. That will immediately put you in a category of someone who doesn't know what they're doing. So please don't do that. Yeah, you're definitely protected talking to Kevin or talking to our team. And then Randy, will do one last one. Randy wants to know, what's the panel's thoughts about angel groups? Heard positive things about angel groups from other advisors, wanted to hear panel's thoughts. Well, I mean, I can answer that quickly. We work with angel groups every single week. As a matter of fact, I was just emailing with several earlier today with some other deals we're working on trying to get funded. So I think that most of the angel groups, especially when you go with work with the larger ones, like the tech in Southern California, Tech Coast Angels, Pasadena Angels, there's 3 or 4 other great groups that are smaller, but still have great people involved. So I would definitely get in touch if you're ready to raise capital. Now, most of the startups, the reality is you're not ready to raise angel money or VC money. So I would talk to a program like ours, or talk to Kevin, Kevin's Precelerator program. You really need to talk to people who, you know, can help you position yourself. It's not just coming up with a great pitch deck, but also, are you actually ready? Do you have the KPIs or the metrics or the traction to actually be able to credibly pitch for angel or VC? So that's something that we do all the time, is work with founders to try to get them ready with our team. So why don't we wrap up on that, and then our contact info is here. I can get you in touch with Kevin, and we can answer, you know, more detailed questions offline. But thank you so much, Kevin, for joining us again. And we're going to try to bring you back. We've got some other great presentations. We know you do. So we're going to look forward to having you come back and join us again in the future. So we'll sign off, and thanks so much for joining us.
Yep.
See y'all.
Take care, everyone.
Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.